You ever have that feeling like you've opened your eyes in the wrong century? Like you woke up in a room that isn't yours, with a life already waiting for you to live it? Keep that feeling. Hold it tight. Because tonight, I'm taking you through doors most people pretend weren't there. Not the grand gates of palaces, but the side entrances, the stairs that creak, the rooms that sweat. We'll walk Rome before the sun is kind, touch the herbs that kept warriors alive, follow a girl who heard voices no one else could, and stand inside an oven that fed a town while it tried to burn the baker. If you're here for clean lines and marble speeches, this isn't that. This is what keeps the lights on in a city that never admits what it loves. Dim the room. Listen for the small sounds. Water, fire, breath. We're beginning. You come to, in a space no bigger than a sigh, stone sweating, straw under your cheek, a lamp that might have been stolen if the night had been longer. Your name, let's call you Livia now, because you change names like other people change sandals. You live in a cellar, which is a nice way to say the earth is your ceiling, and your job starts whenever a fist hits wood. The room is both home and office. One mattress, one comb, a smudge of chalk for your face, a cheap bronze mirror that tells fewer lies than the men upstairs, no running water, a bucket you refuse to look at. Your privacy is a curtain and a prayer. You sweep. You always sweep. Wine stains, dust. A forgotten sandal from a man who told you his wife didn't understand him and then forgot his own shoe. You paint your face with chalk and rouge until you look less tired than you are. You use coal to pull your eyelids forward, to make strangers think you are awake when part of you is away. Perfume helps not to smell good, just to smell other than the crowd that will line up later. Someone once called you charmingly awake, and it fed you for days. Water next. You walk to the fountain and hope no one is washing a chicken in it. You splash your face, rinse your mouth with wine if you're lucky, scrub with natron until your skin stings and your pride does too. If coins are kind, you go to the baths. There the steam tightens your chest, the strigil bites your skin, and for 5 minutes you are the cleanest person on your street, which is a title that fades faster than perfume. You dress in the thing that tells the city who you are before you speak. A short toga, bright and loud, because the law says respectable women wear the long dress, and you are not allowed respectability. Your outfit is a signboard. Your earrings are bells. Your sandals are simple and fast, because sometimes you must be both. Your hair is curled, maybe dyed, or hidden under a blonde wig from Gaul. Blonde tells a story Rome loves. Exotic, imported, expensive, like soap, but alive. You stand in a doorway near a bathhouse, a market, a tavern, the places where people are already damp, bored, or impulsive. You speak in the language that makes the day move. 2 denarii if you're quick. Your neighbor says 1. You adjust. You smile and call a man's sandals clean. He grins like you gave him a temple. You hate the way the city pretends to be shocked. Rome taxes you, registers you, brands you if someone else owns you, and still scolds you for obeying the rules it wrote. The publicani come with their tablets and their boredom. You pay the fee that keeps aqueducts flowing and hypocrites hydrated. Your name appears on walls you did not build. The walls talk more than you do. They say Livia is quick. Livia is kind. Livia will listen to a poem for 1 extra coin. They also lie. They say you robbed a man who couldn't count. They say someone else is better. The walls are Rome's review page, and men write when happy, drunk, or angry, which is to say often, and not in that order. The brothel, the lupina, is a maze of stone beds, thin mattresses, and curtains that breathe like tired lungs. The rooms are the size of a bad thought. The madame, call her Sabina, takes her cut and promises to fix everything she never fixes. She shouts when a senator arrives. She soothes when a girl cries. She is a roof you pay for. She is also a roof you cannot do without if the street has already taken too much from you. Sometimes you work in a tavern instead. You pour watered wine and dodge hands that mistake buying a drink for buying your body. You flirt just enough to keep the coins moving, not enough to start a fight, unless the fight will attract more coins. The tavern smells like boiled cabbage, fish sauce, sweat, and decisions made after too many cups. The bouncer is a retired fighter with one eye who hates poets. You like him for that. Other days you choose the street. Freelance, fast feet. You hover near a temple, not to provoke the goddess, but because men do the provoking themselves. You wear bright colors so wives can see you before they pretend they didn't. The Vigiles glance at you like a problem that pays their salary. You talk, you gauge, you move. You learn to hear the sound of coins before the sound of promises. You learn that a man with too many rings is either generous or dangerous. You learn that both can be true. Health is its own market. You've learned vinegar washes and herbal ointments. You've learned to pray to Venus for luck and to Fortuna for coin. You burn incense to keep away the eye that stares too hard. You know about silphium, a plant that vanished because people wanted it too much. You know about wool tampons soaked in hope. You know about birth and what happens when there's no one to take a child but the street. The temple of Asclepius gives you dreams that feel like answers. The bottle gives you sleep that feels like drowning. You get older. The city does not. You lean into what you know: conversation, discretion, speed. You become less replaceable because you learned what men actually want: to be told their sandals are clean and their secrets are safe. Sabina offers you a cut if you stay. You consider it. You've seen enough to be a manager of curtains and moods. You've also seen enough to be tired. History will pretend it never met you. It will talk about marble and laws and perfect noses, and it will pretend the graffiti on the wall is a rumor, not a record. But you know better. You write your name under the skin of the city in tiny scratches that outlive you. Livia was here and worth every coin. The stone will hold that when your body is done being an argument. Move north with me. The air sharpens. The light bites. A healer, call her Runa, walks a path she could walk blind. She carries a basket that smells like earth and bitter tea. Men think healing is a soft thing until they need it. Runa knows how to stop blood and how to stop a lie. She crushes yarrow between finger and thumb, presses it into a wound until the red slows and the breath steadies. She heats water with a handful of leaves that sting the tongue, but calm the fever. She doesn't use our words for chemistry, but her hands have learned the same laws. Angelica dries on a line above her hearth, hollow stalks casting thin shadows. She shaves the root into a pot when a chest won't open or a cough won't go quiet. She mixes it with fat for a salve that pulls infection out like a splinter. Smoke rolls under the rafters on hard nights, juniper on the coals, needles snapping, room filling with a clean that feels like a boundary. Sailors bring this ritual back to ships, hoping the smoke knows how to climb a mast and keep ghosts off the ropes. Spring is a soft knock. The birch bleeds clear and sweet when tapped right, a brief season that tastes like waking up. Runa catches the sap in a bowl and calls it a promise. She gives it to the woman who hasn't felt strong since the long dark, to the boy who burns and shakes, to the old man who wants one more walk to the river. She ferments a jug for later. She boils bark into tar when a burn turns mean or a bite goes wrong. In the bathhouse, birch leaves slap skin and call heat to the surface. The body learns its border again. Meadowsweet dries in bundles. White flowers turned into a medicine that eases pain and brings down a head that feels like a drum. Runa doesn't know the word for the thing inside that makes pain smaller, but she knows the way a jaw unclenches when the tea has time to work. Mugwort hangs over the door. Some plants are medicine, some are maps. Mugwort is both. It steadies the stomach, calls sleep back to a bed that hasn't held it in days, and keeps the night from crowding the mind. Runa burns a strand during a birth when fear gets louder than breath. She crushes garlic with honey and gives it to a fighter whose wound smells wrong. He curses at the sting and thanks her the next day when the red fades. She boils nettle until the sting is gone, but the iron stays, and she hands it to the woman who is pale as snowmelt. She tells her to drink. The woman argues. Then she stands without the wall the next week. Runa smiles and marks the season by what comes back to life: people, plants, paths. She writes none of this. She doesn't need to. The land remembers if you listen, and she teaches a girl, and the girl teaches a child, and the herbs carry their own gossip across centuries. This helps, this hurts, this does both. Be careful. Walk south again, then east. A girl in a field listens, and everything changes. Call her Elise of Domre now, because we promised to change the names, and because the name never made the miracle anyway. She kneels in a garden, and the light unhooks from the air. A voice comes like a thread pulled through cloth. Go save a country. She is 13. She tells no one, and tells the ground instead. Tears into dirt, prayers into wind. The voice returns, and won't leave. By 16, she goes to a captain who laughs, and then stops laughing when she says something she shouldn't know. They test her, because that is what men do to what they cannot explain. Priests ask questions until their throats ache. They check her body because they think purity is a switch you can flip. They find nothing to punish and everything to fear. She asks for a banner, not a blade, white cloth with holy words. She finds a sword behind an altar because the world loves a sign when it can be staged in a chapel. They give her armor, and the men watch her mount a horse and try to decide if they should follow a girl or a miracle. They choose both. Orléans burns like a fever dream. The city is ringed, the days are ash, the nights are arrows. Elise rides in white, and the crowd calls her a promise given shape. She doesn't know the right words for war, but bodies know how to be brave in front of a banner. She takes an arrow in the shoulder, breaks it off, and goes back to shouting until men who are going to die decide they would rather not. The siege breaks like a dish on a floor. The English retreat. The air tastes different. She leads the king. Call him Armand, now, to Reims for oil on his head and a circle on his brow. Towns open like palms as they pass. People lean out of windows to see the girl on the white horse, who looks like a story they told themselves in winter. In the cathedral, the king becomes crowned, and Elise stands with the banner and cries because the voice told her this would happen. For a moment, faith looks like geometry. Everything lines up. Then the lines drift. She wants Paris next. The king wants peace because he likes rooms with tapestries and food that arrives on platters. He sends too few men, too late. She charges anyway. A bolt bites her thigh, and she bites back. Night wins, and the order to retreat says what no one will. The crown does not love what it cannot control. She keeps fighting on smaller roads, in smaller towns, paying for bread with coins people give her because they need her to be what she was in white. The world tightens. In Compiègne, she rides out. The gate closes too soon, and the ground grabs her horse's legs. Hands grab her armor. She is taken, sold, questioned again by men who pretend the questions are holy. Guards watch her when the church should. A bishop, call him Duclair because he liked shadows, wants to make a lesson out of a girl. He hangs the noose of her clothes around her neck. Wear this, and we can call you damned. Don't, and we'll call you something worse. They ask if she's in God's grace. She answers the only way that keeps pride and truth from breaking each other's teeth. If I am not, may I be placed there. If I am, may I be kept there. They burn her anyway. 19 years and a crowd that isn't sure what it just watched. Someone holds a cross. She dies saying the name that made sense of everything for her. Ash doesn't argue, but ashes travel. Years later, the papers are torn up, the verdict is reversed, and the church that killed her crowns her a saint. History makes strange circles when it feels guilty. Stand up. It's midnight. But the day is starting. A baker, let's call him Martin, lights a fire inside a clay dome he trusts more than he trusts himself. He keeps a jar alive that has a personality and a temper, the starter that turns water and flour into something that breathes. He mixes by hand because there is no other way. He kneads until his shoulders talk back. He pulls his cloak tighter because the night is a thief and the oven is not hot yet. No scales that always agree. Wooden scoops, a trough carved from wood that has its own smell. He wets a cloth and covers the dough like it is a child going to sleep. He feeds the oven wood until the walls glow like embers under skin. He rakes out ash, wipes the floor with a wet rag, and listens. There is a moment when the oven stops being hungry and starts being ready. He knows that moment the way a mother knows a fever broke before the temperature says so. He bakes what the town can afford, fine white loaves for the rich who like their bread to be pale and soft and smug. Brown wheat for the people who work and need to chew to remember they're alive. Dark bread mixed with rye and barley, and beans for the poor who eat more bread than anyone and get the worst of it. He keeps a ledger not because he loves numbers, but because the guild does, and the law loves to catch a hand short by an ounce. The assize in one country, its cousins elsewhere. Rules that say price stays and weight shifts when grain goes dear. The inspector arrives without warning, weighs a loaf, and looks at Martin the way a hawk looks at a rabbit. The punishment for cheating is public and cruel. Stocks, a parade with shame hanging from your neck, a ban from ovens that feels like exile. Martin doesn't cheat. He cannot afford honesty as a luxury. He uses it like a shield. His hands are burned in small ways. His lungs know smoke like a friend who won't leave. His back argues with sacks of flour. He fears fire more than he fears men because fire doesn't bargain. The town pushes bakehouses to the edges because one spark can take a street. Some places share an oven. People bring dough with marks cut into each loaf so they can find their own when it comes out, like faces in a crowd. Women are in this room too, always. A widow named Helene keeps a bakery running because the guild lets her keep her license after grief. She trains a niece. She does the same work for less praise and more blame. She sells bread from a basket and knows the names of every child who steals a heel and then brings a coin back the next day because shame is a teacher and hunger is cruel. The church eats bread like a clock. Monks break it 3 times a day, and on a higher day they bake the host in silence, flour white as a lie, stamped with symbols that make hands shake. The poor line up at the gate and receive loaves as alms. Bread keeps riots quiet and kings on thrones. In bad harvests, the city shrinks the loaf rather than change the price, and the people notice even if the officials hope they won't. When bread goes missing, windows break. The oven is a public service. Martin knows this. He is not just a tradesman, he is a hinge the whole door swings on. He cleans his tools when others are waking. The peel leans against the wall long and kind. The trough is scraped, the floor is swept. He saves a piece of dough to be tomorrow's beginning. He breathes in flour and his chest tightens and his heart loosens. He thinks of the word that means sharing bread and how it also means sharing life. He doesn't know Latin, but he knows the feeling. We've walked under Rome's skin, through smoke where warriors slept, beside a girl who burned and would not be quiet, and into a room that feeds a town while staying hungry itself. The pattern is simple, even when the stories are not. People do the work no one celebrates, and the city pretends not to see. People make medicine with their hands and faith with their breath. People light fires that save you and could ruin you, often in the same hour. You don't need monuments to remember them. They wrote themselves into walls, into recipes, into the way we still move when we are afraid. Keep sitting with me. There's more. We haven't finished with Livia and her altar to Fortuna, or Runa. and the way mugwort hums in a room if you let it, or Elise in the sound a banner makes in wind over armor, or Martin and Helene, and the day the inspector came twice. I'll keep the names changed like I promised. I'll keep the details you gave me and build them into rooms you can walk through. And when the space in this breath runs out, just tell me to continue, and we will. The morning in Rome doesn't feel like morning. The light trickles in slow, bouncing off marble and dust, not flooding the streets, but sneaking in. For someone like Livia, it isn't sunrise that wakes you. It's footsteps, sandals on stone, the sound of someone who already wants something. You learn to tell the difference. The fast, urgent steps of a soldier, the measured, heavy rhythm of a senator who believes the world should pause when he walks. The clumsy shuffle of a drunk who can't remember if he's looking for wine or company. You don't need to see their faces to know which coin purse is worth the smile you're about to wear. She leans in a doorway near the bathhouse, the steam rolling out like breath from a giant. The air smells of wet limestone, oil, sweat, and something else. A tension you can't name but feel pressing against your skin. Every face that passes pretends not to look, then looks twice. That's the game. Rome hated the mirror, but couldn't stop looking into it. Respectable women crossed the street, lifting their hems so the dust didn't touch them, as though dust cared about their dowries. Men with power slowed their stride, caught between shame and desire, both of which cost the same 2 denarii. Sometimes Livia remembered the graffiti etched into plaster by hands that were drunk, clumsy, or vengeful. Maritima is quick. Felicia too fast but cheap. Lucia, 2 coins, worth it. She had seen her own name once, scratched near the forum wall. Livia listens. It wasn't about her face, her body, or her perfume. It was about the way she didn't laugh when a man admitted he was terrified of dying in battle. The walls became a second skin, one you couldn't shed even when you tried. Her name would outlast her. Maybe that was a comfort. Maybe it was a curse. The tax collectors came next. Not clients, not friends, not enemies, but worse, bureaucrats. They arrived with wax tablets, wooden styluses, and the kind of faces that had never once cracked into a smile during work. They didn't care about your wig from Gaul or your perfume that cost a week's wages. They cared about numbers, tallies, and whether you'd paid the vectigal ex captures. If you hadn't, they'd fine you, jail you, or worse, ban you from working. In Rome, you were allowed to exist only if you were also willing to fund the aqueducts, the temples, and the very stones you weren't supposed to walk on with dignity. Livia once tried to charm a taxman. Just once. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Your eyes are beautiful. They'll look lovely when you're standing in court." She paid double that day and never tried again. Shift the world north again. The Vikings lived in air so sharp it felt like knives. Snow piled like walls, rivers froze, and life was measured in what plants could be coaxed to grow in soil that seemed to fight back. But Runa, the healer, knew how to listen. She walked barefoot through frost sometimes, claiming it taught her which herbs survived in silence. She collected yarrow with fingers that smelled like iron, pressing it into wounds until warriors who thought themselves immortal groaned like children. She believed the plant whispered when it was ready to be picked, a faint hum against her thumb. One winter, a boy came home with a cut that had gone sour. His arm was swollen, hot and oozing pus. His mother wept, certain death was sitting in their house. Runa crushed garlic, mixed it with honey, and packed it against the wound. The boy screamed, tried to rip it off, but Runa held him down and sang low, the kind of song you only hum when you're bargaining with gods. By morning, the swelling had eased. By night, the boy was asking for bread. The family left a carved wooden charm at Runa's door, a bird with outstretched wings. She kept it on her shelf until it cracked with age, a reminder that garlic and faith had saved more than medicine alone. Juniper was her shield. She burned it after death swept through a village, smoke curling into rafters, scratching at the ceiling like claws. People stood in doorways, breathing the sharp scent, believing it drove sickness out. Maybe it did. Maybe it was just belief that did the work. But the air always felt different after, less heavy, as though the walls could exhale again. Birch sap was her spring secret. She called it the tree's blood. One year, when famine pressed too close, she tapped the tree too early, and the sap tasted bitter. She drank it anyway, handed it to the old man whose ribs showed through his tunic, and told him it would carry him to summer. He laughed with no teeth and said, "If I die, I'll tell Odin you watered me like a tree." He lived until autumn. She called that her greatest miracle, though she never claimed credit. Mugwort was her doorway. She burned it in a hut where a woman screamed through childbirth, the smoke thick and bitter. She tied it in bundles above bed, saying it kept nightmares from biting. Once she gave a sprig to a warrior before battle. He tucked it into his belt. He never returned. His brother brought the sprig back to her, blood dried on its leaves, and placed it on her table without words. For weeks after, she smelled mugwort and thought only of silence. South again, and the air smells of incense and politics. Elise of Domrey, still wearing armor too heavy for her shoulders, still holding a banner taller than her body, rides through streets where people kneel as though the ground has turned holy. She is 17, her hair tucked under a helm, her hands blistered from sword and rain. She believes utterly, without cracks. Her faith is not soft. It's sharp. It cuts through hesitation. Soldiers twice her age follow because to refuse would feel like spitting in God's face. In Orleans she was struck by an arrow and pulled it out herself, pressing her hand against the wound and shouting, "Forward!" Men who had been ready to flee turned back. Later, when asked why she didn't rest, she said, "The banner must not fall." They believed her because they needed to. Sometimes faith works best when it has no room for doubt. But faith doesn't stop politics. After the coronation, whispers grew. Advisers muttered that Elise was too bold, too loud, too certain. Kings don't like to share crowns, even with girls who give them. When Paris resisted, and Elise bled into the dirt with a bolt in her thigh, the retreat was ordered. She called it cowardice. They called it strategy. In truth, it was both, and the moment she lost Paris, the court began to unmake her. Her capture was almost mundane. A gate closed too fast. A horse stumbled. Hands pulled. Betrayal rarely comes with a drum roll. She was sold, traded like a jewel or a weapon, and brought to a court where men with robes and books sharpened their questions like blades. They asked about her visions. They asked about her clothes. They asked about her grace, as though grace was a coin to be counted. She answered with words that would outlast them. "If I am not in God's grace, may He put me there. If I am, may He keep me there." They burned her anyway. They thought ash would erase her. Instead, it spread her. Back in the medieval bakehouse, Martin lifts loaves from the oven with a peel that has seen more heat than wood should. The crust crackles, singing a song only bakers hear, the small sigh of bread cooling. The smell fills the street, pulling people before the rooster even considers crowing. Bread is life, and Martin is the man who decides if the town wakes full or hungry. He knows the punishments for cheating. Once he saw a fellow baker dragged to the stocks, loaves tied around his neck, children pelting him with rotten apples. His crime, selling bread an ounce too light. The crowd laughed, but Martin didn't. He measured his flour twice the next morning, hands trembling. His wife, Helene, sells loaves at the market. She calls out prices with a voice that cuts through noise. Her basket is heavy, her back bent, but her smile sells what her words already promised. She knows which children will beg, which widows will trade a prayer instead of a coin, and which noble ladies will wrinkle their noses if a loaf is too dark. Bread is never just bread. It's class, power, charity, punishment. It's everything the town pretends to separate, but can't. On feast days, the church orders special loaves, spiced, sweet, shaped like doves or crosses. Martin bakes them by night, his arms sore, his eyes burning. He knows he'll never taste them. They're for altars and nobles, not hands like his. Still, he makes them perfect, because imperfection in holy bread feels like a sin that could set fire to his soul. One night, the fire did nearly take everything. A stray ember leapt onto straw. Martin stamped it out with his boot, heart hammering, sweat pouring down his face. If he'd been slower, the entire street could have burned. People would have cursed his name for years. He sat by the oven afterward, staring at the coals, whispering to himself that bread was worth the risk. He didn't believe it, not then. But by dawn, when the first loaves came out and people lined up, grateful and hungry, he believed it again. That's how lives crossed in silence. Livia with her chalk-dusted face and cheap jewelry, Runa with her mugwort smoke and birch sap, Elise with her banner high and her body burning, Martin with his flour-caked hands and his fear of fire. None of them carved statues, but all of them left scratches that last longer than marble. And we're only halfway through their stories. Rome had a way of pretending it was eternal, while feeding itself on people it refused to name. The senators gave speeches about virtue in marble halls, their voices booming, their fingers lifted like prophets, and when the echo faded, they walked quickly down alleys where girls in bright togas leaned in doorways. Those same girls paid taxes to fund the senators' aqueducts. The city was a circle of hypocrisy, and Livia knew it. She knew it every time a man slipped her coin and whispered, "Don't tell," as if secrets ever stayed quiet in Rome. One night, she followed a client out of the brothel and into the street. He was a magistrate with clean sandals and the smell of incense clinging to him. He looked over his shoulder like a thief, though the only thing he stole was his own dignity. She laughed softly, not unkindly, just enough for him to hear. He spun, furious, his hand raised. But then he saw the smirk still playing on her lips, and his face crumbled into something like shame. He handed her more coins than she'd earned and walked away faster than he'd arrived. Livia pocketed the silver and muttered to Fortuna under her breath, half prayer, half curse. In Rome, luck was the only god who answered without judgment. Far north, under skies that never seemed to settle, Runa watched the herbs she hung by her fire blacken with smoke, but never lose their power. Her hut smelled like earth and bitter sap, like a place where the boundary between body and spirit blurred. People came to her in the dead of night, whispering their pains as though the walls had ears. Sometimes it was warriors with cuts so deep the bone gleamed white. Sometimes it was mothers clutching infants who burned with fevers. Sometimes it was men who admitted with eyes lowered that they hadn't slept in months because nightmares clung to them like frost. Runa gave each what she could. For wounds, she pressed yarrow and garlic and prayed while tying the linen. For fevers, she mixed birch sap with meadow tea and held the cup to their lips until they drank. For the sleepless, she burned mugwort and placed nettle under the pillow, whispering to the unseen as if it might bargain with her. She never promised miracles. She promised only that she would try. And in a world as harsh as theirs, trying was sometimes the closest thing to salvation. She remembered once a boy came running, his hair wild, his face pale, saying his sister had been taken by spirits in the night. Runa followed him into the hut and found the girl convulsing, eyes rolled back. The family wept, begging her to chase the demons out. Runa burned juniper and spoke steady, her hands pressing the girl's chest until the spasms slowed. Later, when the girl awoke, dazed but alive, the family praised the gods. Runa said nothing. She knew it wasn't only smoke or prayer, it was something in the earth, the plants, the body itself, a truth she could never name, but always felt pressing at the edges of her work. Elise, in her prison, pressed her fingers against the stone wall and traced shapes that weren't there. The guards laughed, saying she prayed to stones now, she ignored them. The voices that had called her in fields now came in silence, as if the world itself had learned to whisper. She asked for strength. She asked for clarity. She asked for the courage to face fire without screaming. At her trial, the men circled her like wolves. They wanted her to falter, to say one wrong word they could twist into a confession of heresy. She gave them nothing but faith. When they demanded she deny her visions, she shook her head. When they told her to wear women's clothing, she refused, saying the armor was her shield against the men who guarded her. They sneered, wrote their lies, and prepared the stake anyway. On the day of her death, Elise walked steady. Witnesses said her face was pale, but her eyes were brighter than the flames waiting for her. She asked for a cross. A soldier, shaken by something he couldn't name, carved one quickly from wood and handed it to her. She kissed it, lifted it, and when the fire rose, she called on the name that had guided her since she was 13. The crowd fell silent. Even her enemies could not mock her then. The fire took her body, but her words lived. "We have burned a saint," one Englishman whispered after, the kind of admission that echoed long after the smoke cleared. Meanwhile, Martin the baker never thought of saints. His faith was simpler: dough, fire, coin. Every night he rose before the world, lit his oven, and prepared bread for people who never thought of him once they ate. But he had his own miracles, quiet ones, hidden in flour. One winter, famine tightened its grip. Grain prices rose, and the guild forced bakers to shrink loaves rather than raise costs. The people noticed. They always noticed. Whispers spread through the market that bakers were hoarding grain, cheating, feeding the rich while letting the poor starve. A crowd gathered outside Martin's bakehouse, fists pounding, voices rising. He stepped outside with loaves still steaming, held them up and shouted, "This is all I have, take it, so!" They did. They rushed forward, grabbed the bread, tore it apart in their hands, devoured it before it cooled. By morning, Martin had nothing left but an empty oven and tired arms. But the crowd dispersed. No stones were thrown through his window. No torches were lit. He had given up everything for one night of peace. And when dawn came again, neighbors left grain at his door, scraps from their own stores. He baked again. He always did. The threads pulled tighter now. Rome's walls carry graffiti that outlives kings. Viking huts burn herbs that smell like survival. A girl in white armor burns but refuses to scream. A baker kneels by his oven, his arms dusted with flour, his lungs blackened with smoke, and keeps a town alive. Different centuries, different streets, but the same truth. History forgets names it should have carved in stone. And yet, when you lean close, you can still hear them. Livia whispering to Fortuna. Runa humming to a child in fever. Elise praying as flames curl around her. Martin muttering over dough. These are the voices the statues don't carry, the stories buried under sermons and speeches. They are the reason the world still spins. Livia's life in Rome was measured not in years but in coins. One night's earnings might mean a meal and a new jar of perfume. Another night meant hunger and the sting of insults shouted by men who had just left her room. She learned to store away not just coins, but memories, small victories in a world that rarely gave them. Once a senator came to her, too drunk to stand. He slurred his name, bragged of his lineage, waved his rings like proof of divinity. Livia listened, waited, and then quietly slipped those rings into her pouch as he passed out. The next morning he left without noticing. She sold the rings in the market 2 days later and lived better for a month. Was it theft, or was it payment owed for the bruises he left? In Rome, morality was flexible if you had to survive. Sometimes, between clients, she'd walk to the temple of Venus and light a tiny oil lamp. Not because she believed the goddess was watching, but because the act made her feel less alone. The flame flickered in the shadow, and Livia whispered names. Not her own, but those of friends lost to disease, to beatings, to a night gone wrong in a tavern's back room. The goddess never answered, but the silence felt less heavy when it was shared. Runa, far away in the frozen north, believed silence itself had a kind of language. She said the way snow fell told her whether a winter would be merciful or cruel. She read omens in the way birds landed on branches, in how birch bark peeled, in the taste of nettle leaves after frost. People mocked her sometimes, but they came back when sickness struck. She told stories as she healed. When she pressed yarrow into wounds, she spoke of Odin hanging from the tree, wounded but wiser. When she poured birch sap into a cracked cup, she said it was the earth giving back what it had taken. When she burned juniper, she claimed the smoke was a bridge between worlds, carrying sickness away. Whether these tales were true or not, they calmed the frightened, and sometimes that was the medicine people needed most. One child asked her once, "Runa, how do you know which plants heal and which ones kill?" She smiled, pressing mugwort into her palm, and said, "I don't always know. That's why I listen." Elise's story did not end in fire, or at least not only in fire. After her death, whispers spread like wind. Pilgrims claimed to see visions of her face in the smoke of candles. Soldiers swore her voice called to them in battle, steadying their hands. Mothers told daughters of the girl who rode in white, who stood before kings and never bowed. The English wanted her erased, but instead they carved her deeper into the heart of France. Years later, when her trial was overturned, when priests admitted the lies, her story became not just legend, but weapon. France held her up as proof that the divine favored them. Generals invoked her name. Farmers whispered prayers to her when planting seed. In paintings, she was no longer a peasant girl, but a saint in shining armor, carrying a banner that never touched the ground. History reshaped her, but the truth remained. She was a girl who listened to voices no one else heard and believed in them enough to change a kingdom. Martin the baker never expected statues or sainthood. His victories were smaller, quieter, but no less vital. On market days he watched children tug their mothers' sleeves, pointing at his loaves with wide eyes. He sometimes slipped a crust to the hungriest ones when their mothers weren't looking. He'd wink, press a finger to his lips, and return to his oven. Those moments made the burns on his arms sting less. Helene, his wife, carried her basket through the streets, calling out, "Fresh bread, honest weight!" It wasn't just a slogan. In times when other bakers cheated, Helene's words brought trust. Trust meant customers. Customers meant survival. She knew the power of bread better than most. Once, during Lent, when people were supposed to fast, a noblewoman came in secret and bought a white loaf. "Don't tell the priest," she whispered. Helene smiled and handed her the bread without a word. Secrets, after all, were as common as flour. There were dangers beyond fire and famine. Once a thief broke into the bakehouse, hoping to steal flour. Martin caught him in the act. The man was gaunt, his ribs sharp against his skin. Martin could have dragged him to the guild, could have called the watch. Instead, he gave him a sack of bran and said, "Bake it, share it. Don't come here again." The man fled, but a week later, Martin found a basket at his door with eggs and cheese inside. Payment, gratitude, proof that mercy was sometimes safer than punishment. So many lives, scattered across centuries, bound by work and by survival. Livia leaning against a wall in Rome, her name etched in graffiti that outlives her body. Runa walking through frost, her herbs whispering secrets the world had forgotten. Elise riding into battle, her banner brighter than steel, her faith louder than fear. Martin pulling loaves from an oven, the town's hunger quieted for another day. Each lived in a world that judged them, used them, and tried to forget them. Yet their marks remain, not in statues but in scratches on plaster, in sagas told by firelight, in prayers whispered in desperation, in the smell of bread that still makes mouths water centuries later. If you listen closely, you can hear them still. The cellar door closing, the strigil scraping skin, the hiss of sap dripping from a birch, The crackle of fire in an oven, the cry of a banner flapping in the wind. All the sounds history left out, but that still echo in the spaces where truth hides. And maybe that's the real story. Not marble, not crowns, not cathedrals, but people who endured in silence, who made the world bearable even when it refused to see them. People whose names were scratched on walls, whispered in huts, burned in fire, or forgotten in flower. The ones who were never supposed to be remembered, and yet somehow, here we are, remembering them.